Hi, folks. Thanks for joining me today. I wanted to take a few minutes and talk about the power of compound interest and how getting that first little bit of nest egg set aside in your finances really starts to open up the door for many more good things to come. The first little bit of a foothold, if you will, takes a lot of work and effort. And really, it comes from sweat equity, as we like to call it. There's really no other replacement for it. But once we get a little bit of sweat equity put aside in the form of investment savings, what we can start to see is that sweat equity being significant enough, hitting a point of let's call critical mass, that it starts now doing more and more of the heavy lifting, and it allows you not to have to contribute as much. And so what I want to demonstrate to you is just how this principle of compounding works. Sometimes folks kind of describe this as like a hockey stick, where it's kind of flat, 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 and all of a sudden it shoots right up, and we've got this significant increase that it seems almost like it came out of nowhere, but it was preceded by all these years of work. And even though it seems like it's coming from out of nowhere, it was actually all those prior years that finally, you know, lifted it up and allowed things to take off and become what it is. And investing really isn't any different. Putting your money away into the markets and allowing this compounding to take effect is the same principle. And so the very first stage, the first step, is what's most difficult. It's the hardest part of the journey. But once we get things moving along, almost like a snowball, uh, it becomes easier, and the momentum of the snowball, continue with that thought, rolling down the hill, it acquires more snow, which acquires more weight, which it allows it to roll down the hill even faster. There becomes an acceleration, a point or effect. And I want to demonstrate that to you in some videos, but maybe conceptually, some of the first ideas just to kind of sign off on this and say, okay, yeah, no, I get behind that is, look, if we put $100 away as an example, and that gets a 7% rate of return, our money has gone from 100 to $107. So we get, 7% rate return. And even that's, a fairly good return, but with only $100 only invested, it's $7. And truthfully, you probably could have made that $7 a lot easier than having it been done through investing or compounding. Like the effect of this is really rather lightweighted. But let's say we have $10,000 set aside, and now it's $700 that's been earned, or we have $100,000 that's been set aside, and now it's $7,000, or maybe we have $1,000,000 that's been set aside, and now it's $70,000. Like the weight or the significance or the value of that starts to become more and more material, such that you couldn't just work a few more hours or even a few more years and start to, come to the same net result, to the same impact. So there's a sheer size to this as your nest egg grows and gets larger, that it becomes, one might even describe it as scary, like scary in a good way, right? It's getting to be rather massive. And so the first $100,000 can take quite a bit of time of saving to get to that point in time, but then the next 100,000 doesn't take quite as long, and the next 100,000 not as long after that. So it would depend on how much you're saving and what kind of rate of return you're getting. If we kept things very simple, let's say you put $10,000 a year away with no returns, then simply enough, in 10 years you'd have $100,000 a year saved, and we'd keep growing by $10,000 a year, and every decade we'd have another 100,000. Whereas, let's say we put $10,000 a year away, and we have now some return on that money, a 7% return. We've gone from 10 years commitment to about as much as 7 years. So it's already shaved off 2 to 3 years. Well, what about the next 100,000? How long would it take to go from, from 0 to 100? Let's call it 7 years ish is how long it takes with a 7% rate of return. How long would it take if we had going from 100,000 to 200,000? Interesting enough, it drops down to only about 5 more years is all the longer it takes to acquire that money. Well, what about from 200 to 300,000? Well, you're going to start seeing is the number keeps pulling down. I think it's down to about 4 years, and then it's down to 3, and then it's down to 2. And so each new 100,000 takes less and less and less time. And that really maybe is just a really fun way to be thinking of how compounding works, and how this critical mass of getting more and more dollars working for you instead of you doing the work, and you're really significant. You're the big roller and mover and shaker, and what causes your finances to happen. What can start to become much more powerful is the nest egg, the money that's been set aside, and this ongoing growth. that that nest egg can start to do as it gets to be larger. So what we want to really focus then on, what's important is let's start saving and start it earlier. What's important about that is because why is that valuable? Why would you advocate for it? One, I'm always hesitant to turn around and say like you got to do this immediately, because sometimes I feel like it produces this urgency or this concern or this worry of like, oh man, I'm missed out, and then it's like, I've ruined my finances. And I wouldn't want to convey or give that suggestion, because there's a great Chinese proverb, but I think just is always so apropos with finances, and that's when's the best time to plant a tree? And the Chinese proverb says, well, 20 years ago, like that's the best time, like that's when you should have started saving your money. But when's the next best day to plant a tree? And today is, yesterday or tomorrow, like right now. Like, I mean, there's only so much we can do about the past. So if you're hearing me and you're like, okay, I maybe haven't given a chance to allow compounding to take its great effect and force and be this mover and shaker in my finances, it's not as if the story's already been told and it's all been written off and like there's nothing to do. In fact, well, we do what everyone else does. We start taking those first steps and get things moving along. But the material reality is that the sooner you can start saving, and the sooner we can get compounding working for you, and the sooner we can start to have it become the bigger player in your finances than you as the earner. And the more we can almost get you out of the equation and let this a lump sum of money start to carry its weight, to throw its weight around, the less you actually have to save, because now it's this weight is doing the work and not you. And so like one of the like basic reasons to start saving, as soon as you reasonably can, and there's, different time frames in which we'd shoot for to have that happen. Again, I don't think it has to be a number one priority, but it should be a priority. Like we want it to happen sooner rather than later. Like the importance, why do you want this to happen, is that it costs less. That's the less amount of money that you ultimately have to save and set aside. And so if we look at like some long-term statistics on like what happens if you save over a 40-year period of time versus a 30-year period of time versus a 20-year period of time, again, capturing all this notion of compounding and its work for you, is that the amount that you need to save to come to the same goal, decreases almost by halves between that 20 and that 30 to 40-year period, where to a point where, you would only maybe need to save 6 to 7% of your income if you gave yourself as much as 40 years of a time horizon for saving, versus it needing to be more like 25 to even 35%, depending on your rate of return of your savings, if you only have 20 years to save. And so there's a huge difference between only needing to save 7% of your ongoing earnings versus saving 25 to 30%. And again, it depends on a number of variables. There's a lot of possibilities of what things could be. But if we think of this as like just a classic portfolio of a 60-40, 60% stocks, 40% bonds, and we have certain amounts of being pulled off from that portfolio, those numbers that I'm giving you start to hold true. And the point here isn't so much the actual hard numbers as it is compounding, as it is, let's get that snowball, working for you. And so, the first little nest egg, like there's not much we can do about that. Like there's really no compounding, compounding hasn't grown enough to really carry its weight to do a lot of, a lot of good for you. Like you just got to get in there and you just got to save the money and you got to make it happen. There isn't much of another solution. But thankfully, it does get a little easier, because of compounding. And so once we've kind of hit that first 100,000, people sometimes describe this as things exploding. Like your network just all of a sudden seems like it's just, growing. It's like, oh my gosh, things are really taking off. And it's because we're starting to have like this critical mass in your finances. So, the question could be, well, what do we need to do? Like, how do I get then that first $100,000? Like what can we do? And there's a number of things that are available to you, but like all financial planning, all investment principles are really fairly straightforward, and there's just only so many variables. And so if we're looking to try to get some money saved and get things moving along, we either need to be looking at ways to increase your income, decrease your expenses, or commit to various savings goals. Those are the big three. There's kind of a fourth one, which is geared towards, tax efficiency. But, the first one is like, look, if you're having trouble finding ways to save money because you got needs and living expenses and things you want to spend your money on, you don't want to put it towards investing, as powerful and attractive as that might be. You're just like, I want to use the money today, and that makes sense. I mean, there's not wrong to do that, but at some point you got to start saving it too. And so if we're a little tight for income, tight for being able to save, then one of the things you could do is find ways to increase your income. Perhaps you pick up, more shifts at the hospital. Perhaps you pick up, maybe some locum tenens work if you're a physician. Maybe it's another side job or a side hustle, or we get something going in here. Like, what's another way to make some money? And if you're only a high income earner who's an established professional who's taken a lot of years to get to where you're at in your career, where you've already really seen the benefits of compounding at play with just your accrual or your accretion of knowledge, then like what this is like if you've just seen it in other terms. um, Probably the best way for you to go and just make some more money is just to do a little more of what you do, because that's where you get paid, presumably, that higher dollar. You don't need to go and reinvent the wheel or do something else for work. Just do more of that. So that's, the income piece. The other side could be, well, okay, we do enjoy living and we want to live for today and have an enjoyable life. It doesn't make sense to put it all away for the future. Like, who wants to do that, especially if that future maybe never happens for you, and then it's, you never got a chance to enjoy all those years of hard work. But nonetheless, maybe we could find ways to cut back on some of our expenses. Maybe we've had some lifestyle creep and things have gotten to be a little nicer and more enjoyable than what you can really afford them to be, especially if it's starting to creep in on those long-term goals. So I would say, maybe we need to be looking at ways to cut back. So and the best way to do that is getting serious about having a budget and paying attention to how much money's coming in, but then more importantly, how much is going out and where's it going out on, and do we really need that? And again, is anything that I'm spending that money on right now also have a compounding effect? Most of our day-to-day consumption doesn't have compounding working for us. Investing does, but the day-to-day consumption doesn't. So like, is it really that worthwhile? Is there any expense that you're incurring today that's going to become cheaper and cheaper and cheaper over time because it does more work for you? Probably not. So let's keep that in mind. Like, maybe some of these things really just aren't worth that while. But then, we also just need to, because we're behavioral creatures and we need habits. The challenge with saving is if you won't have a habit of saving, you won't be saving, and you got to start that habit at some point. So the more of it we can kind of automate our savings, maybe leaning into employer retirement accounts and just adjusting our contributions and kind of taking that money out of our pocket before it ever even hits the pocket, and we don't even aware, like we're not even aware to be there to be spent, and kind of forcing ourselves into savings, like that can be really powerful and one of the best things we can do. And start wherever you can. Maybe it's at 5% of a contribution into the 401k, the 403b, the employer retirement account, and we just bump it up by 1% each year, and it goes to 6% and then 7% or 10. We just keep pushing it until what we'd want to be shooting for is probably at least 15% of your gross earnings is being saved away. Now, the more you do that, we go be above and beyond 15%. Good for you for being an overachiever, but do you need that? It would kind of depend on what your goals are. What that breeds for you is optionality, the possibility of doing other things and just accelerating things along. And then, especially with optionality of work not being a requirement or a necessity, maybe your savings are getting to be sufficient enough that they can replace any income needs you have. Well, now you can decide whether or not you want to work anymore. So that's a beautiful thing, right? But then, the fourth thing would be having some, an idea towards tax efficiency. Just because we're getting, a 7% rate of return, what really causes that compounding to take off is the net return, the after-tax return. And so being smart about how we're investing the money and what kind of accounts are available to us, and whether it's, a pre-tax contribution or a Roth contribution, and what type of investments being housed in those accounts, what's called an asset location strategy. These can be just other ways, little tweaks. They're not huge pushes, but they're little tweaks that can start to move things along and help to grow your wealth. We want to keep as many of those dollars in your pocket so we can keep them for the compounding, allow them to continue to do that work. So, I think you guys know what compounding is. You've seen it. You've already experienced really firsthand. Now it's just time to bring that home to your finances and allow it to really take its effect and bring you, continued good, and, really give yourself a chance to take a break later on in life and not have to be working into the latter years because, we chose to start savings later at a point in time, and we prioritize the here and now and the today a little more, a little too much, and that has its cost to it, and it kind of becomes easier. The sooner that we can get savings, and the more we can get that compounding working for you, the easier it is. It is for you to rest content and be at peace, and ultimately the less expensive it is. So, yeah, it's the case, folks. After the first 100,000, your finances kind of start to really take off. The net worth starts to take off. We're really starting to see these things, work in your favor. So, please tune in for more videos being produced by us. If you'd like to learn a little more about compounding, or how we can be of help, or how we do this sort of work, bring the value that we do to our clients through financial planning engagements, reach out to Bonafide Finance, for a complimentary consultation. We'll meet with you and see if ultimately we're a good fit, and start to demonstrate in other ways of how smart money management, early adoption, getting on top of the ball here sooner, can really pay for itself, have great long-term lasting benefits that your future self will thank you for.